The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to SOLIDNotes by DesignPoint. My name is Roy Mutalik. I'm an application engineer here at DesignPoint. And today I'm going to be starting our first in a series of these webinars, kind of tips and tricks for working in SOLIDWORKS. Today's is called Stop Doing It Over Again. And it's about the design library. We're going to talk about utilizing the design library. And basically it's a tool that everyone should be using. And we'll take a look at some of the things we can do with that here. This is a recorded version of a webinar that was previously presented live on January 15th, 2014. Let's go ahead and jump into the design library here. So first, let's start with what is the design library? Really, it's just a shortcut for keeping features that you're going to be using commonly, using throughout the day or the days that you're working there. In the background, it's really just a folder that we keep these, but we can link it within SOLIDWORKS, and it's embedded there, and it sits right on the right side task pane for easy access to allow you to just click and drag and bring those features in. And again, as I mentioned already, we're going to be putting features in there that we will want to reuse, use them over and over again, and that way we don't have to recreate them every time. So that's really all it is, just a shortcut there and a location to keep those files. So why would we want to use the design library? And this factors into what I was saying with it's a severely underutilized tool. This is something that almost all SOLIDWORKS users can benefit from in terms of what you're working, whether you're working in parts, whether you're working in assemblies or drawings, you're marking up these drawings. This is certainly something that everyone can benefit from. And we would want to take advantage of the design library for a few different reasons. First off, convenience. It's located right there on the right side task pane of SOLIDWORKS. Those features are right at your fingertips. You can very easily click, drag and drop those and to bring them right into SOLIDWORKS. No more recreating those features. So that certainly is the biggest driving factor there. It's much faster than going through and creating these features each time. We're going to save kind of our favorite features into the design library. And certainly will minimize that kind of frustration of redoing the same work over and over again. By just keeping these features right where we want them. All right, I'm going to give you a quick overview of what I'm going to go through today here, just kind of an introduction to working with the design library, and I'll also give you some tips here later on for more complex applications of it here. We're going to start with adding annotations to the design library, so this is applicable to drawings. And this is certainly a portion where almost all SOLIDWORKS users will benefit from it. There's a lot of reusable information when working with drawings, and we'll put those in the design library, and that way we don't have to keep recreating those. Next, we'll go into actually creating a feature in the design library more at the part level. In this case, we'll do an example of a basic cut feature, and how if you have such a feature that is reused in multiple parts, we don't have to create it every time. We'll just create it once, stick it in that design library, and it's ready for us to use. We'll look at understanding references that are created in these design library features, and it's important to understand those when we particularly get into creating more complex features, understanding what references those are going to need. And as I said, finally, we'll do a little bit more of a complex example of kind of a Revolve Cut, and this will allow you to get your feet wet a little bit with more complex features and how those could be applied to the design library as well, and how we can utilize those. All right, so let's go ahead into SOLIDWORKS here and take a look at first some annotations in the design library. So when we open up SOLIDWORKS here, we can see my right side task pane, and my design library is actually this icon right here. It's the 3 books there, and when you click on it, it appears that it is here. We can see there are a couple of different nodes in here. The top one is just our generic design library node there. If I go ahead and click on the little plus sign there, you can see it expands, showing several different folders here. So just subfolders organizing that design library. Now what we're looking at here is the out-of-the-box design library. This comes with every seat of SOLIDWORKS, whether it be standard, professional, or premium. You're going to get this standard design library here right out of the box, and it contains many different features here that we can look at. So feel free to explore what's already in there. You'll see all those different components already added to that design library Some of these may immediately be applicable to what you're working on there. So definitely feel free to explore what's already there for you. And you won't even have to create these features. They're just sitting there for you. What I'm going to do for this example is I'm going to create my own new design library, just so that we can keep everything clear, nice and clean in what I'm working on here. So creating a design library, as I said, in the background, it's really just a folder. And so I have one sitting on my desktop here. I'm just going to go ahead and add that path so that it shows up in this right side task pane. I can do that by hitting this button right here, Add File Location. And in doing so, I can just browse out and find, sitting on my desktop, I have my own design library here. So just add that file location, and you can see it shows up as its own node there. So that's kind of the basics of what the design library is, where it's located there. Let's take a look at some examples now of using that. So I'm going to open up a couple of files here, sitting right on my desktop. And I'm going to open up two different drawings here. So looking at both of these drawings here, we have a couple of things that are in common with them. We've got some fillets. Let's focus on those here, on several of the edges. And all these really are is they're kind of cosmetic fillets there. It's applied to kind of round over those edges there. They're not really structural fillets of any kind. So a common example of something you might call out on a drawing is perhaps a note explaining exactly that. So let's go ahead and create a note here. I'll grab my note. And all I'm going to type here is that these are cosmetic fillets, all cosmetic fillets, 1 millimeter unless specified otherwise. So I'll say that, all cosmetic go ahead and type that there, and I'll make it a little bit bigger just so that we can kind of see what's going on there. All right, so that's our note here. I did do one thing wrong here. I typed this in lowercase. I'm sure many of you have the same practice that we have here at DesignPoint. All of these notes should be in all uppercase. And it's a nice feature of 2014. We can actually change that here. So I go ahead and click right on the note. And on our property manager, we have the option to make all uppercase here. You go ahead and click that, and it will just switch it for me right there. So certainly a nice enhancement to 2014. We have that ability. All right, getting back on track here. The point of this is that is a note that I'm going to be applying to many drawings here. I have several drawings that will have those cosmetic fillets, and I want to be able to call those out. Now, certainly this might be something you put on the template, but perhaps we don't do it that way. We insert it on each individual basis here. Rather than typing that note each time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add it to my library here, and I can very easily access it next time I need to use it. Just drag and drop. So to go ahead and add to the library here, I'm just going to go ahead and hit this button right here on the right side, Add to Library. And that will bring up my property manager for Add to Library here. I'll select what I'd like to add, grab that note, and it's going to ask for a name here. So let's give this a name. What do we want this to be tagged as in the design library? So I'll call it something like Cosmetic Fillets. Next, we'll select which library we'd like to add it to. I'll make sure to add it to my custom library here. And that's all there is to it here. We'll go ahead and hit the check to accept, and that will get added to the library there. You can actually see it here immediately, sitting right there in our design library. So let's go ahead and use this, show how we can utilize this. I'm going to switch over to my other drawing here. And again, we have that same scenario here of those cosmetic fillets on this part that we want to have that note applied to. Now, rather than coming up to note and retyping that again here, I'll just come out to my design library here, and I'll find that cosmetic fillets library feature. And all I have to do here is click and drag. So go ahead and click on it and drag it out here. And you can see immediately that note comes in exactly formatted that way. You know, it's all capitals, just the same way that I had typed it previously. So this is a very simple example of how we can utilize the design library. It hopefully gives you a feel for what we're doing with this. Saving those features we want to reuse, and they're very quickly available to us to reuse right there. I'll give you a couple more examples of things you might want to add to the design library. Surface finish symbols. So sometimes complex annotations like surface finish symbols. I have one added here to my library. I'll go ahead and bring that in. This is a surface finish symbol showing a minimum, maximum roughness value, and it's showing a radial lay, it's a machined surface finish symbol. If this is something that you commonly use, it can be a bit of a pain to have to go through each time and type it into our symbol layout here. So this is a great example of something that we can actually create once, save in our design library, and it's right there at our fingertips for us to use. A weld symbol is another such example. Same kind of scenario here. I'll go ahead and bring one of those out here. Here we have a fairly complex weld symbol that I created by filling in, again, that property manager. It's like a 3/16 fillet weld on both sides. It's intermittent. It's got some directions there as well. So this is a fairly complicated weld symbol. Perhaps if we're using these all over the place, it's not something we're going to want to type in every single time. So we create it once, save it to the design library, and it's ready for us to use whenever we need it there. Lastly, blocks can also be saved to the design library. So I've got an example of a block here. This is just a field weld symbol that I created here. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Go ahead and bring that one in here. And we can see it's just a slightly more complex annotation there. There's a field weld symbol there. So you can easily create your own custom annotations or blocks, however you'd like there. Those can be saved and easily inserted into drawings. I know that's certainly a workflow that a lot of users take advantage of, working with those blocks. So that can be done as well. So that kind of gives you an overview of kind of a simple use of the design library. They're keeping our annotations, reusing them, and certainly something that I feel every SOLIDWORKS user can take advantage of in some way, shape, or form there. You know, design library applied to drawings there in the form of annotations. All right, let's close these guys down, and I'm going to open up a different file here to go through design library as a feature. So what I'm going to open up here is just a block part here. So all I've got here is a block, and what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be creating a keyed cut, kind of a hole for a shaft to go through that has a keyway in it as well. And to do that, we always need to create that cut in some kind of a block, of course. So this is just kind of a dummy block that will be used to define that cut. That cut is what will actually be our feature itself for our library. So let's go ahead and create that cut. I'll do that very simply, just the way that you would in any part file here. I'll go ahead and sketch right on this top face here. And I'll go ahead and create my geometry for that keyed cut here. And we'll get a rectangle here. Get some of my sketch relations on here. A couple more dimensions here. And we'll go ahead and trim this. And it looks like I need one more dimension here. Now the last thing I'm missing here to have this sketch fully defined is actually the location of this this hole here. You can see it's free to kind of slide anywhere on the face. And I'm actually going to leave it that way for the time being here. I don't want to overcomplicate things in first starting out here. We'll come back and look at that in a minute here. So it is underdefined, and I am aware of that. We're going to kind of keep it that way for the time being here. So let's go ahead and cut this. Just do an extruded cut with this, and go ahead and send that through all. And that will create for us our keyed cut there, keyed hole. All right, we want to go ahead and add this feature of just this cut extrude 1 here to our design library. So I'll go ahead and do that exactly the same way I did with the annotation before. Come over to the right side here and grab our Add to Library command. And it's going to ask us what we'd like to add. So here you want to be a little bit careful and make sure you get just that feature. So I'm going to come from my flyout tree here and grab just that cut extrude 1 feature, my item to add there. I'll add it to my design library. And it's pulling a name here. It's actually from my file name, but that's perfect. That's exactly what I'll want to name this here. So we'll go ahead and add that to the library there, hit the check to accept, and it will put that in there. Now you can see as I hover over it here, it's actually created a separate file here, SLD-LFP. And if we look out in Explorer as well here, in my design library itself, we can see that file here, KeyCut SLD-LFP. And that's what it's saying is it's a library feature part. So this is actually saved out a separate file here that it uses for that design library. Essentially what that means is this piece that I've created here, this part file, we don't actually need to save that. We don't need to worry about that at all. It's just kind of used to create that library feature, but we don't need to save that. So I'll actually go ahead and close this down, and I don't even need to save it. We can see we still have our KeyCut sitting in our library there because, again, it's a separate file. All right, let's go ahead and use that KeyCut. Take a look at that. So I'm going to go ahead and open up, and I'm just going to grab just kind of a block again here. So I've got this part called base, and it's just a block. Oops, looks like it's already got a cut in it. Left over from last time I went through this here. All right, so we've got just a block there, and we're going to go ahead and bring in that KeyCut. So to do that, all I have to do is click and drag. And you can see as I drag it in here, when I place it over a face, it's actually looking for a reference face here. So I'll just go ahead and release it anywhere over here. And we can see here we've got placement plane. So we'll look at that in just a minute. It's looking for that reference of essentially where that sketch was created to originate that cut. But we can see it's created that, and it's really as simple as dragging and dropping there. We'll get into some of these options in a minute here. But I hit the check to accept, and we can see we've created that library feature there. So we've created that cut that simply. It shows up in the tree as a library feature with that icon so that you know where it came from. However, if we expand this, we'll actually see that it has all of those same features here that the feature itself would require. It's got that sketch, and it's got that cut. So it's exactly identical in that sense to any other feature that you can create. All right, let's go ahead and I'm going to close this down here. And let's take a look at references in the design library here, the references of that actual KeyCut. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up that SLD-LFP, the actual library feature part. So I can do that by just double-clicking right here in the design library here. And that will actually open up that library feature part here. So again, it looks just the same like my block there because we need that block as a reference. But it's actually just that library feature. And I'm going to go ahead and look at the design tree here on this part. And we can see in addition to just our regular design tree here, which has our extrudes, our cuts, etc., we've actually got two other folders as a result of this being a library feature part. We've got a references folder up top here and a dimensions folder up top here. And what these are is they're tracking the references and the dimensions within this library feature part, allowing me to edit them, make changes to them, and see what's going on. So let's take a look. I'll go ahead and expand both of those here. And we can see under references, I only have one reference here as a placement plane. And that's a result of how that sketch was created there. All it's looking for is that plane that that sketch was created on. It has no other references there. So it's tagging only that placement plane as a reference here. In dimensions here, we can see all of the dimensions that were created internal to that sketch. So these are all of the dimensions that it's going to need to bring through when creating that library feature part. We've got two subfolders here, and I'm going to come back to those in a minute here. Let's make a change to this library feature here. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to come into this sketch here, and I'm going to edit that. And at this point, I had mentioned earlier that this is free to roam wherever it wants here. Let's change that here. Let's add some dimensions so that it's kind of locked down. So I'll go ahead and add some dimensions between the center point here and this edge. And it doesn't particularly matter what that dimension is. And I'll add another one to this edge here. again, it doesn't particularly matter what that dimension is. And I'll go ahead and exit out of the sketch. Now, by adding those two dimensions, let's see what happened in our tree here. We now have two additional references here, edge 1 and edge 2. And these are actually a result of the two additional dimensions that were created here. D4, which is actually showing where that's located, and D5, located in this direction. So by adding those two dimensions now, we've got two additional dimensions and two more references here. When this comes in, for it to be able to create these two dimensions here, it's going to need to know what these two edges are. And we'll see how that plays into adding that library feature here. I'm going to do one more thing here really quickly. I'm going to say that D5 and D4 here are actually locating dimensions. So I'm going to stick them in this folder right here. And that's just our way of telling SOLIDWORKS that these are not internal to the library feature. They're actually locating that library feature here. We don't need to worry about these ones here. We can just leave those out. That's fine. But I've put those two locating dimensions in that locating dimensions folder. At this point, I'll go ahead and save this library feature. Again, I'm saving the library feature part. And I can go ahead and close that down now. All right, let me go ahead and bring that into a part again, show you applying that, and we'll see how that changed. Let me open up a different block here, just because that one had a cut feature already in it. All right, this will work here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and apply that keyed cut now to this block, just the same way as I had before. So go ahead and click and drag. Same way. Again, it's looking for that first placement plane as a result of that first reference. And as soon as I release now, we're going to see a slightly different behavior. On the left side of my property manager, we can see our references exist here. And those are those two additional references that were created by those dimensions. In addition, we have a nice preview here. So it's showing us what it's looking for in terms of that reference. And the nice thing is this is actually an embedded SOLIDWORKS window, so you can actually rotate this and take a look at what you're trying to get there. So it looks like it wants this top edge here for edge 1, so we'll give it that. And I can simply click, and it will automatically advance to the next reference here. And then it's looking for the left edge, so I'll go ahead and give it that one here. And as soon as I do that, you can see it will complete that and create the cut operation. In addition, since I actually tagged those two dimensions as locating dimensions, we can now see that they've actually showed up here. So we can see D4 and D5. And you actually could have named those dimensions. It's probably a best practice to name those. But it's brought those in here. And I could very easily change them right from here. So if I wanted to be located slightly differently, I could easily change those dimensions right here. So that's kind of the convenience there of tagging those as locating dimensions. They come in correctly there, and they're available for you quickly and easily change those values. If we take a look below here, we can also see size dimensions. And these are those additional dimensions there that relate to the size, those kind of internal dimensions. And what I can actually do is go ahead and check this box here to override dimensional values here. That will allow me to change any of these values that I'd like here. Again, probably should have named these so we would know what is what. But let's take a look here. Let's say I make, instead of a 0.25 here, I make this 0.5. That will make that deeper kind of keyway there. So that just is overriding dimensional values. Now I should mention it's only overriding them in this part file. This is not writing back to your library feature part here. It's just overriding them in this instance that's been placed there. So that's a little bit of introduction to kind of references there and how they can be handled, why we'd want to tag our locating dimensions, and how we can actually override our size dimensions as well when we bring these in. So again, references are going to be vitally important there, and you're going to want to be careful what references are getting created. We'll talk about that a little bit later when we do a Revolve Cut feature. We see how we can carefully create those to track our references. All right, I'm going to close out of this one and open up another file here to show you something else here with a little bit more complex ways to handle design library features. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and open up this library feature right here. This is an SAE J1926. It's a circular cut. It's a fluid power port is actually what it is. And this was created as a library feature part. So this is a library feature already been added to my library here. So I'll go ahead and open that up here. And we can see it's basically a Revolve Cut. It's been created there. Again, in a cylindrical block. You have to have some kind of a block that you're cutting that out of here. And what I wanted to highlight in this one here is if we take a look at our configuration manager, we can actually see that we have several different configurations of this library feature. Different configurations controlling different sizes here. So this is actually one way that we can work with library features here. We can create different configurations. In this case, it's actually even driven by a design table. And it will allow us to create many different sizes, all stored within one library feature there. So we don't have to create dozens of different library features for all the different sizes. We can actually configure library features. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this down and show you how that actually applies when we're putting the part in here. So let me go ahead and open up a part to apply it to. All right, so we're going to go ahead and apply this to the space right here. So I'll go ahead and grab my fluid power port here and click and drag it onto that face. So again, it's looking for that placement plane here. So I'll go ahead and drop it right on this top face here. If you ever get that wrong, place it on the wrong face from the drag and drop, you can always come in here and actually clear it out, edit that. As soon as I place that, though, we can see it's creating a cut that's a little bit too big. But we have this nice option down below here for configuration. So all it's doing is it's pulling those different configurations and it's listing them out right here. So we can go ahead and pick exactly which we want here. And I believe in this case I want a 3824 as a configuration I'm looking for. That one looks a little bit big. I'm not sure which one it is. Let's try this, 3416. And it's looking for a reference here. So it's looking for a reference edge. Again, we can see a nice preview window pops up here. And all it's looking for is that edge that it wants to be concentric with here. So we'll go ahead and give it this circular edge here. And that will create that cut. So it looks like I picked the side that's a little bit too big. Let's try a different one here. There we go. It's a 5/16/24 is our size there. And we can see it create that here, that fluid power port cut. Again, we have the same options here. Looks like we haven't tagged any locating dimensions in this case, and that's actually a result of how this library feature was created. The only reference is that edge that it's concentric with respect to there. But we do have our size dimensions as well here, and we can easily go ahead and override those values here by hitting this checkbox to change any of those values that we'd like. Again, only overriding in this instance, not overriding in the feature at all. So that's another example of how we can handle library features, create some more complex or different size library features here using configurations. Mention one other thing here. If we wanted to put that fluid power port on this face here, we would have a little bit of trouble because we don't have anything to make that concentric with regard to. You can remember that reference. Only reference was looking for that circular edge. So what we've actually done in this case to get around that is created two different library features here. This one is designed specifically to be put on a rectangular face here. And if I bring this one in here, we'll see the references it's now looking for are different. So let's get a size there. And in this case, it's looking for kind of linear edges for it to stick to there. So you may have to do something like that when working with your library features if your locating references are kind of incorrect or not universally applicable. But certainly easy enough to do. And again, all of our configurations driven right by the design table and come right in over here. All right, let's move on from this and do one more example here of a little bit more complex library feature. We'll do a Revolve Cut, sort of something like this, and see how we would create those and manage those references. So I'll go ahead and close this guy down. And let me pull up one more part here. This one's called Revolve Cut. And again, all this is just a block. It's just a starting point here for me to make that cut. So let's go ahead and make the cut here. What we're going to need to do is have some plane going through the middle of this part, and we're actually going to sketch a profile on that plane and revolve that around to create that cut. So I'll mention one thing here. We do actually have a plane going right through the middle of this here. Our right plane, you can see, cuts right through the middle of the part. So that would be a plane I could use to create that revolve feature. The problem is if I use that right plane, it's going to create that reference up top in that reference folder where it's looking for that right plane. So it wouldn't necessarily be incorrect. It would just change your workflow and how you place this slightly. It would create a plane as a reference. And that's not what we want. All we want as a reference is really that top face. So to get around that, I'll kind of show you the process here of how we can define that. I'm going to go ahead and start a sketch right on this top face here. And in this sketch, all I'm going to create is a line. It's actually going to be a construction line. And this is just going to be a reference for a plane that we're going to create. So that's just a line on that face there. And I'll go ahead and exit out of this sketch. So we're going to use that now to create a plane for our Revolve Cut feature. And this plane is going to actually become part of that library feature, come along for the ride. That's how we kind of get around that external reference. So I'll go ahead and create that plane here. I'll grab my reference geometry. And to create the plane, I'm going to use two references here, a neat little trick. I can actually use the line twice here. So I'll grab the line itself and the endpoint. And what that actually does is it creates a plane normal to the line through that endpoint. So that's a neat little shortcut. It's great for doing things like sweeps, getting a profile right normal to the end of your path there. But in essence, the importance with this is we have a fully defined plane here whose only references are this sketch. It's not referencing anything else external to this model. So the plane is only referencing the sketch. The sketch is only referencing that top face. Now I'm going to go ahead and use this plane, and that's what I'm going to actually sketch on to create that profile. So we can see by kind of stacking those, our only reference back to the model is this top face. So let's go ahead and sketch right on this plane. And here's where I can go ahead and create whatever profile I'd like there. So I'll just create something like this here. Just something simple for the purpose of demonstration. And I'm just going to get a couple of relations here. I'm going to send that through there. Maybe get some dimensions to lock this down here as well. Now I'm being careful with my dimensions, making sure I'm only creating them to within this sketch here. Again, if I created a reference to, say, this edge over here, I'd be creating another external reference. I don't want to do that here. And what am I missing here? That one. One more dimension should finish this up for us here. All right, there we go. So we've got it fully defined. That's just our profile here for our Revolve Cut, just kind of creating something quickly there. So I'll go ahead and turn that into a feature here. I'll do my Revolve Cut and revolve it around this axis here. And that will create for us our cut feature there. So we're going back through my references again. I've got a sketch here that's used to create this cut. The sketch only has a reference to this plane here. The plane only has reference to this sketch here, and this sketch only has a reference to this top face. So essentially, we've created this cut only referencing this top face here. All has been done correctly. All right, we're going to go ahead and add this to our design library now. And I'll show you a different process for doing this. As with anything in SOLIDWORKS, there's a dozen different ways to do everything. So we'll show you how to do it that way. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do a file save as here. And instead of saving this as a part, I'm going to save it as a library feature part. So that SLD-LFP, just like we had seen before. I'll grab that. I'll name it Revolve Cut. That's fine. And I want to make sure I'm saving it in my design library. So it looks like it's defaulting to the default design library. I'll go ahead and stick it in my design library there. And we'll go ahead and save that. It's giving me a warning here about creating a simplified library feature. And this is actually a result of the step that we haven't done yet here. I'm going to say no to this here. All right, so the last step in this process is I've created this as a SLD-LFP, library feature part, but I haven't actually told SOLIDWORKS what parts of this need to be added to the library, need to be brought into the library. It's just seeing the whole thing as a part, basically. So to do that, all we have to do is tag these features that we want as library features. So on the left side in the tree here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select each of those features here. So my cut. I also need to bring the plane because of the references and the sketch. So I'll select all three of these. And from a right click here, I have the ability to just add these to the library. And we can see what that does. It puts a little L, green L on top of them there. And it's saying those are the features that are actually in this library feature, this library feature part. That's what we want to bring in, kind of ignore everything else. All right, let's take a look at this now. Since it's a library feature part, we have our references and our dimension folders again. So let's just take a look at these, make sure everything's okay. If I expand my references here, we can see my only reference is that placement plane. Because I was very careful with the way that I created the sketches here. I only created references to the top face where I initially created sketch 2 here. So we only have one reference there. And for dimensions here, we have all kind of internal dimensions here. I actually did not create a locating dimension. But we could easily go ahead and do that if I'd like. Just a matter of kind of backtracking on this. Center of this hole was located based on where this plane was defined. It's actually this point here. So if we go in and edit this sketch and add some dimensions here, this is what's actually going to create our locating dimensions. We'll see that here in just a minute. So we've got these two dimensions. And I'll go ahead and stick those in my locating dimensions folder. Just drag and drop there. All right, I've made some changes to this, so I'm just going to do a save of it. So just a file save. Again, I'm saving a library feature part, not saving a part document itself. Also, because I added those dimensions, you can see that we've got placement referencing those two edges now as a result of that. All right, so I've saved that. Let's close it down. And let's go ahead and take a look at actually inserting that here. So I'll open up a block again here. It's kind of a block part. And let's see if I can find that, that library feature. Oh, did I save it to the wrong place here? Let's see if I can find that file location. I'm not sure where that is. It's not showing up for me here. There it is. It just needed a refresh there, kind of getting out of the design library and getting back in, and now it showed up for me here. So I'll go ahead and bring that Revolve Cut in here, do a click and drag. Again, all it's looking for is that placement plane at first. Next, it's going to be asking me for these reference edges, so I'll go ahead and give it the 2 references. And like that, we've created a Revolve Cut. So this is how we can go ahead and create kind of those more complicated features in that way. Again, the important part is being very careful with your references there. What we're creating and understanding why a reference is getting created. Kind of the way to troubleshoot that would be to backtrack through and see which features are creating what references. You know, if we delete this dimension, does our reference go away? And that's kind of, some of these you'll have to kind of work backwards on them. But this is a process that can be followed for any kind of complex library feature. You know, Revolve cuts, you can even do it with lofts, lofted cuts, you can do extrudes. It's not limited to cut features. You can actually be adding material as well in these. It's all the same concept though, just making sure you're tracking your references as we go through and create these, and understanding why a certain reference is being created. So certainly something to play around with, not something you're going to get right off the bat, but certainly something that will benefit once it's done correctly. All right, let's go back here to the PowerPoint, and I'll just kind of sum up some of the stuff that we did here. All right, so quick summary here. Again, your design library is really, it's just a folder that allows you to keep kind of some of your favorites, whatever you want to use, add them to the design library, and they're right at your fingertips there, so you can drag and drop them very easily. Again, it can hold annotations, blocks, or even features for assemblies, for part files, cuts, extrudes, lofts, anything like that. As long as we manage those references correctly, any of those can be added to the design library. Adding features is as simple as one property manager. So there's just that one button you click, add to library. You have to tell it what you want it to add, and it's really as simple as that. But of course, I showed you another way to do that as well. As almost anything in SolidWorks, there's more than one way to do it. The most important thing when creating design library features, especially complex ones, sort of like the ones we did at the end there with that Revolve Cut, is tracking those references, tracking those dimensions. So it's important to understand that references and that dimensions folder that gets created up top, and knowing how to manage those. Naming your dimensions certainly go a long way, and tagging locating dimensions will go a long way as well, making it much easier for you to kind of work with there. And lastly, now that you all have seen this, have something to kind of play around with, to work with, you should never find yourself redoing the same work. It's really convenient to use that design library. Anytime you create anything you think that will be reused, just throw it in that library there. And it's right there at your fingertips. You can use it whenever you need to there. So that's really the point of this here. Why do we want to redo the same work? Why do we want to waste our time doing that? And that's what that design library is going to prevent us to do. So a great tool that all SolidWorks users, in my opinion, should be taking advantage of. All right, well, that's all I've got. Thank you for paying attention. And again, was SolidNotes by DesignPoint, Chapter 1. Keep tuned. We're going to try to do one of these each month. So keep an eye out, and we'll have a lot of other fun topics and interesting stuff to present to you guys. All right, thank you.